You think you know your father. You hear his voice every day, eat at the same table, live under the same roof. Then one day he disappears without warning. Months later, he returns with one leg missing, and nobody will tell you why. That was the moment I realized the man who raised me might have been living a second life the entire time.
My name is Ethan, and if you saw my family from the outside, you would think we were ordinary. We lived in a large house, had enough money to survive, and everyone knew my father as a respected man. But inside that house, things were more complicated than they looked. My father had 2 wives. My mother was the second wife, and I was her only son. My older half-brothers, twin brothers named Marcus and Daniel, were 1 year older than me. We also had 2 younger sisters, Nora and Sophie. Even though families like ours can be full of jealousy and division, my brothers usually treated me well. Daniel was calm, reasonable, the kind of person who tried to keep peace. Marcus was different. He carried anger in him like it belonged there. Sometimes he was friendly, other times he looked at people like he was waiting for a reason to hate them. Back then I was still in school, worrying about exams, football, and stupid teenage things. I had no idea life was already changing around me. One afternoon I came home and found my 2 younger sisters waiting near the entrance. They ran toward me smiling, asking if I would take them to the corner shop to buy ice cream. They begged the way children do, as if ice cream was the most important thing in the world. I laughed, went upstairs, borrowed some money from my mother, then took them by the hand and walked them there. It was nothing. 10 minutes of my day. We bought ice cream, candy, and came back home. They sat outside in the yard, eating happily while I went upstairs to rest. A few hours later, screaming exploded through the house. I rushed downstairs and found their mother furious, shouting my name, cursing me for buying them ice cream because one of the girls had started coughing. Before I could explain, my father walked in from work. He listened to her for a moment, turned to me, and shouted as if I had committed some serious crime. "Who told you to take them out? Who told you to buy them anything?" I remember standing there stunned. I had only tried to be kind, but in that house, kindness could become trouble in seconds. I went back upstairs, angry and embarrassed. My mother tried to calm me, telling me not to take it personally. She said the woman was sick, stressed, full of pressure, and my father only wanted to silence her. Maybe she was right. Still, something inside me changed that day. I started noticing how often people in our house hid the truth behind excuses. That evening, Daniel found me before I left and quietly apologized for everything. He told me not to let it affect me. Later on my way home, Marcus stopped me outside. He stared at me with cold eyes and accused me of insulting his mother. I told him I had done no such thing. He didn't care. He had already chosen what to believe. That was when I realized peace in our family was thin glass. It looked solid until someone touched it. Weeks passed after that. School continued, life seemed normal again, and then one night my father didn't come home. At first, nobody worried. Men work late, cars break down, things happen. But midnight came. Then later, still nothing. Daniel called one of my father's co-workers. The man sounded strangely calm. He said my father had been sent on an urgent government assignment and might be gone for 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months. No warning. No goodbye. No explanation. My mother acted calm, but I could see confusion in her face. Then her phone rang. She answered, smiled, spoke gently, and told me it was my father confirming everything. I believed her at the time. Much later, I learned the truth. There had been no call. She only pretended so I would not panic. And once I understood that, one thought would not leave my mind. If my own mother didn't know where he was, then who exactly was my father? After my father disappeared, the house changed in ways that were hard to explain. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No fights, no shouting, no police at the door. It was quieter than that. The kind of quiet that makes you uncomfortable. My mother tried to act normal. She cooked, cleaned, smiled when she needed to, and told me everything was fine. But I could see the tension in her face. She was waiting for news that never came. Downstairs, my father's first wife acted differently too. She became more irritable, more suspicious, snapping at everyone for small things. Without my father in the house, the balance between both families had shifted, and everyone felt it. I kept going to school, pretending life was normal. I would sit in class trying to focus while one question repeated in my mind: where was he? Whenever I asked my mother, she gave the same answer: government work. That phrase started to mean nothing. Weeks passed, then more weeks. No calls, no messages, no proof he was even alive. One afternoon, I came home from school, climbed the stairs, opened our apartment door, and called out for my mother. No answer. At first, I thought she was praying. I checked her room. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. The living room. Nothing. I went downstairs and knocked on Daniel's door. He opened it and looked at me immediately. What happened? My mother isn't upstairs. He frowned, then came with me without saying another word. We searched every room again, then the rooftop, then outside near the gate. Nothing. At first we tried to stay calm. Maybe she had gone somewhere quickly. Maybe she was visiting someone nearby, but something felt wrong. I sat in the living room trying to think. My stomach was tight with anxiety. After a few minutes, I went toward the bathroom near the hall and tried the door. Locked. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked harder. Still nothing. Then I shouted her name. Silence. By then, Daniel and Marcus were already behind me. I remember looking at them and seeing fear on both their faces, even Marcus for once. Daniel stepped back and kicked the door hard. Nothing. He kicked it again. The lock snapped open. My mother was lying on the floor, unconscious. I don't remember thinking. I only remember movement. Hands lifting her, voices shouting, running. Our driver was outside near the gate. Daniel grabbed the keys, and within seconds we were carrying her into the car. I sat beside her in the back seat, holding her shoulders, speaking to her over and over. "Mom! Mom! Can you hear me?" She was breathing, but she didn't wake up, and that terrified me more than anything. At the hospital, everything became chaos. Nurses rushed her onto a stretcher. Doctors asked questions we couldn't answer. How long had she been unconscious? Did she have any conditions? What happened? I didn't know. I only knew that my father was gone, my mother was being rolled into emergency surgery, and I suddenly felt younger than I had in years. Daniel grabbed his phone. "We need to call Dad." He tried once, then again, then again. Phone off. No signal. Nothing. So I called my uncle instead. When he arrived, he took control immediately, speaking to staff, asking questions, trying to calm us down. Hours passed in the waiting area, some of the longest hours of my life. Then finally, a doctor walked out. He looked exhausted. My uncle stood first, then all of us followed. The doctor said they had stopped internal bleeding just in time. If we had found her later, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Later, they let me see her. She was pale, weak, connected to machines, yet when she saw me, she smiled. Then the first thing she said was, "I'm sorry I scared you." I nearly broke down hearing that. She had almost died, and she was apologizing to me. That night, as we drove home from the hospital, one thought kept returning stronger than ever. My father was gone, my mother nearly died, and somehow we were completely alone. My mother was discharged from the hospital a few days later. She came home weaker than I had ever seen her, moving slowly, speaking softly, pretending she was stronger than she really was. The doctors told her to rest and avoid lifting anything heavy, but mothers like mine rarely listened to advice when there was a house to manage. Life resumed, at least on the surface. I returned to school. My brothers prepared for graduation. Meals were cooked, rooms were cleaned, and people continued speaking about ordinary things. But underneath all of it, something had changed. My father was still missing. No calls came. No messages arrived. Weeks turned into months. At some point, people stopped mentioning him every day, which felt even stranger than worrying. Human beings adapt to almost anything, even uncertainty. I hated that. I finished my exams and entered the first week of summer break. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I could breathe, maybe life was calming down. Then, early one Monday morning, someone began pounding on the front door. It was barely after sunrise, the kind of hour when nobody visits unless something is wrong. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then the knocking came again, harder this time, followed by the sound of keys scraping against the lock. A voice shouted from outside, "Open the door, it's your father." I froze. For a second, I honestly believed I was still asleep. Then I ran downstairs and pulled the door open. He was standing there. My father looked thinner, older, more tired than I remembered. But what hit me first was not his face. It was the crutches. My eyes dropped lower, and I saw that one pant leg had been pinned up empty. His right leg was gone. I remember staring at him, unable to speak. My mind refused to understand what I was seeing. This was the man who had left home without warning and vanished for months. The man everyone said was on some secret work assignment. Now he was standing in front of me, smiling as if he had come back from a normal business trip. I asked him what happened. My voice barely sounded like mine. He brushed past me and said, "Let me get inside first. You're questioning me at the door like a policeman." By then, the whole house had woken up. Daniel and Marcus came rushing out. My mother appeared behind them. Even the first wife came from downstairs. Everyone spoke at once. What happened? Where were you? Why didn't you call? What did they do to you? He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he lowered himself onto the couch and said it was nothing serious, just a work injury. Something went wrong during an assignment, and they had to amputate the leg. He said it with the same tone someone uses to describe missing a bus. Nobody believed that explanation, but nobody challenged him directly either. That was the effect he had on people. My father could shut down a room simply by deciding a conversation was over. I kept trying. I asked what kind of assignment could cost a man his leg. I asked where he had been. I asked why he ignored us for months while my mother nearly died. Every question was answered with a smile, a joke, or a vague sentence that meant nothing. The important thing is, I came back alive. Some things are better not discussed. Men do what they must. I looked at my mother, expecting anger. Instead, she seemed relieved just to have him home. Maybe fear had exhausted her. Maybe love had. Maybe years of living with secrets teaches people to stop asking for truth. Later that day, I followed her upstairs and asked quietly if she really knew nothing. She hesitated before answering. Then she admitted that he had warned both wives long ago. If he ever disappeared suddenly, they were not to panic or ask questions. They were simply to assume he had been sent somewhere for work. I asked what kind of work required rules like that. She told me to ask him myself, but I already knew asking him was useless. From that day forward, my father stayed home more often. He had been retired after the injury and was receiving compensation from the state. Money was no longer a problem. He had special equipment installed in the car so he could drive with one leg. People in the neighborhood treated him with respect, even admiration. Some called him strong, some called him brave. I called him unknowable. Because the truth was simple. A man does not disappear for months, return missing a limb, and refuse to explain anything unless the real story is far darker than the one he tells. And deep down, I had started to fear that whatever my father was involved in, it wasn't over yet. A year and a half passed after my father came home. By then I had finished school. My brothers had moved away to attend university in another city, visiting only when they could. I had been accepted too, but I turned it down. My father could still manage on his own, but everyday things were harder for him now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I should stay. Maybe it was loyalty, maybe guilt, maybe I was still trying to understand him. Instead of university, I began looking for work. I told myself I would earn money first, help the family, then study later. It sounded responsible when I said it out loud. In reality, I was drifting. My father surprised me by supporting the decision. He even transferred ownership of our driver's small car into my name so I could use it. It was newer than anything I could have afforded, fuel efficient, reliable, and for the first time in my life, I felt like something belonged to me. I spent months applying everywhere. Nothing. Every rejection made me more restless. I watched less capable people find jobs, build lives, move forward. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home, carrying groceries, driving my father to appointments, pretending patience was maturity. Then one afternoon, an old school friend called me. His name was Ryan. We met at a shopping center near my neighborhood. He was the same as I remembered, talkative, confident, always sounding like he knew shortcuts nobody else did. We walked for a while, catching up, until he asked the question everyone seemed to ask. "So, what are you doing now?" "Looking for work." He laughed. "Still doing it the hard way?" I asked what that meant. He lowered his voice and told me he knew people who could get me paid every month through a company without me actually working. A fake position. Easy money, no effort. I should have walked away right there. Instead, I asked how much. When you're desperate, bad ideas sound practical. He said around $1,800 a month. That number hit me harder than it should have. It was enough to cover my expenses, enough to stop asking my father for anything, enough to feel like I was moving. I asked what I needed to do. He told me there was one issue. The company required proof that I lived near a certain area, so they needed a rental contract with an address there. He said he knew a man who could arrange one for a fee, $500 up front. Everything about it smelled wrong, but Ryan spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this before. He explained why payments would go through his account first, why the paperwork needed to be unofficial, why I should keep quiet. Every lie was wrapped inside a reasonable sentence, and I believed him because I wanted to. I handed over the money. Within days, he sent me a rental agreement by text message and told me everything was set. Then the first payment arrived, $1,800, real money in my account. I remember staring at my phone in disbelief. No interview, no manager, no hours worked, just money. The second month, another payment came. I stopped questioning it. That is how people fall into traps, not because they are stupid, but because the trap rewards them first. By the third month, I was driving one afternoon when an unknown number called me. The man on the line asked if I was Ethan and whether I owned a rest house in a certain district. I nearly said no. Instead, I answered carefully. He said he was my neighbor and wanted to meet. We arranged to meet at a tea shop on the main road. When I arrived, he introduced himself as Yusuf. He was older than me, calm, direct, the type of man who didn't waste words. He looked at me for a long moment and said something I still remember clearly. "I don't know if you're involved or if you're being used. That's why I called first." Then he told me what had been happening next door to his property. Cars arriving late at night, parts being removed, engines, doors, metal panels stacked everywhere, workers constantly dismantling vehicles, noise at all hours. He leaned forward. "I looked over the wall," he said. "Those cars look stolen." I felt cold immediately. Then he said the sentence that nearly stopped my heart. "That place is rented in your name." I asked how he got my number. He said the real estate office gave it to him when he complained about unpaid rent and disturbances. Unpaid rent, disturbances, my name. In that moment, everything became clear. The fake job, the rental contract, the monthly payments. I wasn't being helped. I was being used as a shield. Ryan had put my identity on a property being used as a chop shop for stolen cars, and if police raided it, my name would be the first one on paper. Yusuf told me he would report it within days if nothing changed. I left that tea shop feeling sick. I called Ryan immediately. He sounded calm, too calm. He laughed off the accusations and said Yusuf was probably just a difficult neighbor trying to cause trouble. But now I heard something I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't surprised. That was all I needed. I drove to the location myself. The gate was green, exactly as Yusuf described. I waited nearby until it opened. Workers came out covered in grease. Inside, I saw stripped vehicles and stacks of parts. Then one worker casually told me the property belonged to a man named Ryan. My friend had not only lied to me, he had handed me to the police before they even arrived. I got back in my car, hands shaking, and drove straight to the station. Because I understood one thing with complete certainty. If I waited any longer, I wouldn't be walking into that station as a witness. I'd be entering it as the owner. I drove to the police station with the kind of fear that makes everything look sharper. Every traffic light felt too long. Every passing car looked suspicious. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I kept replaying the last 3 months in my head. The payments, the contract. Ryan smiling across the table while he set me up. When I arrived, I told the officer at the front desk everything. I explained how I had been offered fake employment, how a rental agreement had been made using my name, how I had just discovered the property was being used to dismantle cars that were likely stolen. At first, he looked at me the way officers often look at young men telling unbelievable stories. Then he asked one question. "Can you show us the place?" I said yes immediately. Within minutes, I was riding beside an officer in plain clothes, guiding him toward the district. He wasn't wearing a uniform, which somehow made the whole situation feel more serious. On the drive there, I noticed I was no longer thinking about clearing my name. I was thinking about Ryan. Part of me still wanted to believe he had only been involved on the edges, that maybe he was foolish, greedy, careless, but not fully behind it. That illusion ended the moment we turned onto the street. Ryan's car was parked right outside the gate. I pointed at it before the officer even asked. "That's him." The officer said nothing. He simply took note of everything around us. I called Yusuf so he could repeat what he had seen over the previous weeks. He spoke directly to the officer and confirmed the late-night deliveries, the stripped vehicles, the constant activity. That was enough. We left quietly, and back at the station, a senior officer met me. He told me I had done the right thing, that they believed I had been used, and that they would handle the rest. I went home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. For nearly 3 months, I had been walking around with a criminal case hanging over my head without knowing it. Now it was in official hands. Whatever happened next, at least I had spoken first. 6 days later, Yusuf called me again. His voice was almost excited. "They raided the place," he said. "They took everyone." I asked about Ryan. He didn't know. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat in silence for a long time. Relief should have been the main emotion, but it wasn't. What I felt most was disappointment. Ryan and I had known each other since school. We had laughed together, skipped classes together, talked about the future together. I had trusted him because of history, not because he earned it. That lesson cost me less than it could have. About 2 weeks later, I was eating lunch with my parents when my phone started ringing. Ryan. My stomach tightened immediately. If he had been arrested, how was he calling me? I ignored it. Then he sent a message asking where I had disappeared to and why I wasn't answering. I thought carefully before calling back. If he was free, then either they had released him or they hadn't been able to tie him to enough evidence. Either way, I needed to hear how he sounded. He answered cheerfully, almost offended that I had been distant. Then he suggested we meet. Every instinct told me not to go. I agreed anyway. 10 minutes later, he arrived outside my house. He claimed his car was low on fuel and asked if he could ride with me instead. I let him in, but I chose the route, the stops, the pace. If this meeting turned bad, I wanted control of at least one thing. As we drove, he began talking without being asked. He said some of his friends had been arrested. He claimed he barely knew what they were doing. He blamed another man for the fake contracts. He said he was worried they might drag his name into something unfair. He never directly accused me. He never directly asked whether I had spoken to police. But every sentence was fishing. He wanted to know what I knew and what I had said. I played dumb. I acted confused, sympathetic, uninterested. I gave him nothing. Then he said something that made everything clear. "Let's just keep driving. No need to stop anywhere." That was when I understood he didn't want to be seen with me in public, and he didn't want me taking him somewhere official either. He wanted a moving conversation, no witnesses, no fixed destination. I drove for another half hour, bought drinks, kept things casual, then told him I had to get back to my father. I dropped him near his car and watched him walk away. The next day, I visited the officer who had taken my statement. He confirmed what I already suspected. Ryan had been questioned. He claimed he was barely involved and knew nothing serious was happening. Some suspects had named him as a facilitator, but not the leader. Then the officer asked me directly whether Ryan had truly set me up or whether he had been manipulated too. I paused longer than I expected. Ryan had lied to me, used my name, and nearly ruined my life. But he had also been my friend for years, so I said he wasn't the mastermind. I said he was involved, but maybe not as deeply as the others. The officer nodded and wrote it down. I left knowing I had just shown mercy to someone who might never have shown it to me. Months passed after that. I was still unemployed, still frustrated, still trying to build something real, out of a life that kept swerving sideways. Then, one afternoon, I stepped outside my house to run errands and noticed something immediately. My car was gone. At first, I thought someone in the family had taken it. No spare key was missing. No one had touched it. My father came outside on his crutches, looked at the empty space, and said only one sentence: "Get in. We're going to the police." We filed the report, returned home, and I felt worse than I expected. That car was the only thing in my life that felt like progress. It was freedom, movement, dignity. For 2 days, we searched everywhere with no luck. On the third day, Ryan called and offered to help me look. I almost laughed at the timing. Still, I said yes, because something deep inside me had started to suspect this wasn't just theft, it was a message. And I had a feeling Ryan knew exactly who sent it. Ryan arrived that afternoon acting concerned, asking questions, offering help, speaking with the same easy confidence he had always used whenever he wanted something. If I hadn't known him for years, I might have believed he genuinely cared. We spent hours driving through industrial areas, empty roads, side streets, abandoned lots, checking every place where people dump stolen cars. He kept suggesting locations far outside the city, places so remote that nobody would accidentally pass through them. At first, I thought he was guessing. Then I started noticing something else. He wasn't searching. He was leading. Every turn he suggested was too specific. Every road he chose came without hesitation. He knew where cameras were rare, where police patrols were unlikely, where stolen vehicles were usually left after being used hard and discarded. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the fastest way to truth is letting someone keep talking. Late in the afternoon, we stopped at a gas station. Ryan went inside to buy drinks while I stood near the pumps looking across the lot. And there it was, my car, parked beside the far edge of the station as if it had been waiting for me. For a second, I genuinely thought stress had made me imagine it. Then I saw the scratch on the rear bumper, the small dent near the trunk, the hanging air freshener I had forgotten to remove. It was mine. Ryan came back carrying 2 cold drinks and froze the moment he saw where I was looking. Only for half a second, but half a second was enough. He recovered quickly, laughed, and said maybe the thieves had abandoned it there. Maybe, or maybe the man standing next to me knew exactly where it would be. I called the police immediately and followed my father's instructions. They told me to inspect the vehicle but not drive away until they cleared it. Nothing major had been stolen, but the inside was trashed. Burn marks on the console, cigarette damage in the roof lining, tire rubber worn down from reckless driving. Someone had enjoyed ruining what mattered to me. I drove it home in silence. That night, I lay awake thinking about every moment since Ryan had reappeared in my life. The fake job, the rental contract, the monthly payments, the chop shop, the suspicious phone call, then my stolen car being found exactly where he took me. Some people don't need to confess. Their pattern confesses for them. The next morning, I went to see the officer who had handled the earlier case. I told him everything, including where the car had been found and who had taken me there. He listened without interruption. Then he leaned back and said something I'll never forget. Some men commit crimes because they are desperate. Others do it because they think everyone else is stupid. He didn't confirm Ryan's involvement. He didn't need to. His face told me enough. Ryan was known. Maybe not enough to lock away for years. Maybe not enough to prove every act, but known. I left the station with an unexpected feeling, not anger, relief. For months, I had been living inside confusion, asking myself whether I had been naive, whether I had imagined the betrayal, whether I owed loyalty to someone because of old memories. Now I understood something simple. History with someone is not the same as trust. I cut Ryan off completely after that. No dramatic confrontation, no threats, no speeches. I simply disappeared from his life the same way peace had disappeared from mine when I met him again. Sometimes silence is the strongest ending. Life slowly changed after that. I found honest work months later. It wasn't glamorous, but the money was real and it came with clean sleep. My brothers finished university and moved forward. My mother regained her strength. My father remained what he had always been, a man full of secrets, carrying a past nobody could fully reach. We never learned the whole truth about his missing leg. Sometimes he joked about it. Sometimes he changed the subject. Sometimes he stared into the distance as if remembering things none of us were meant to know. When he died years later, many questions died with him. But by then, I no longer needed answers from everyone. Some lessons are enough. I learned that family can love you and still hide things from you. I learned that desperation can make smart people foolish. I learned that betrayal usually arrives wearing a familiar face. And I learned that the moment you stop chasing shortcuts, your real life begins.
What if I told you? Deep dramatic. Most people never realizes. They are being programmed every day. The masked figure whispers, but you just woke up.